with David on several occasions. It's incredible what David and his team do every day. I mean, this morning, I was looking at one of their visualizations that turned up in my mailbox. All their visualizations are completely open. You can see every day they put something new online, stunning ways to actually present data. And basically, David, he looks at the situation that we're swamped with information, but how can we make information fun, even beautiful? How can we answer questions on curiosity? And how can we put knowledge and data in context and make connections between other relevant information sources or knowledge sources? I remember in one of David's books, he has mentions something called the never-ending graphic, which in a way is a situation that we often have within the Commission, because we may start with one question, but that question results in three more questions. And one of those three is dependent on another question. So there's a lot of interaction between data and knowledge. And David and his team make information approachable, and they make it understandable. It creates impact. Okay, I'm now going to ask David if he will then share his screen and also turn on his video.
I will say hi first, as is customary. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. Let me share my screen. One second. All right.
Okay, David, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Darren. Hey, everyone. So, I live and work in London, and I work and live here as a data journalist and information designer. And that's just basically a fancy way of saying that I love data. All kinds of data, numbers, ideas, words, statistics, and turning that data into graphical images that anyone can understand. And I like to go a step further and design that visualized data and information so that it reveals something interesting, or allows us to focus on what's important in the sea of data that surrounds us, or maybe drowns us, or design it so that it tells a story. So that's the data journalism part. And I think when you do that, when you gather data, you visualize it, you analyze it, you design it, you tell a story with it, strange and interesting and even quite magical things can start to happen to data and information. So today I want to take you on a sort of data-driven tour of the universe, if you like. Tell you a load of data-driven stories, show you a lot of data-driven stories, and then I'm sure, and gathered by the surveys you've done already, I don't have to convince you, but maybe by the end we'll all feel that data is beautiful. So let's start with a data set I think we can all relate to, or maybe we struggle to relate to, and that's billions. What does $1 billion look like? $100 billion, $1,000 billion? These numbers are routinely circulated in the media, 50 billion for this takeover, 400 billion for this bailout, and so on. But these numbers are mind-bogglingly huge. They're impossible to relate to in any everyday sense. So frustrated by this, I gathered a load of these numbers from various sources, New York Times, Guardian, and so on, and visualized them in this chart I call the billion-dollar-ogram. So the blocks here are sized according to the amounts, and the colors here represent the motivation behind the money. So pink is giving money away, green is revenue, and so on. So when you take big abstract data points like billions and you visualize them like this, you instantly have a different kind of relationship to them. You can literally see them. But more interestingly, you can start to see patterns and connections and links between numbers that would otherwise be scattered across multiple sources, numbers you'd never necessarily see together. Let me just highlight some for you. So here in the bottom left, we have the amount given to charity by the American people every year. Incredibly generous people, $300 billion a year they give to charity. And that can be contrasted with the amount given in foreign aid by the top industrialized nations of the world, just 120 billion, the other pink block. This is OPEC's revenue, yearly revenue, around about 800 billion. And that little pixel in the corner is their climate change fund. And then dominating the diagram, we have the total eventual cost of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the post-9/11 wars, $3,000 billion. And again, that little square in the corner, that was the predicted cost of the wars back in 2003, just 60 billion. So often with data, the story doesn't reside in the data points themselves. It resides in those gaps, in those contrasts, in those comparisons. And the act of visualization sort of exhibits or reveals, literally visualizes those gaps so the story, the contrasts, the comparisons are more available, more visible. Now this data, this abstract data has been visualized as blocks. It's kind of like Lego. So I can keep adding blocks, I keep adding numbers as they emerge in current affairs, or add huge numbers that act as a sort of context for any spending going forward. Like, for instance, I could add the total eventual cost of the 2007-2008 financial crisis to this diagram. So imagine in your mind how much of that might be taken, how much the diagram might be taken up by that. Let me just add it now. Here it is, 12,000 billion. And that's a huge number. And right now, of course, we're in the middle of another crisis, the coronavirus crisis. And to date, government bailouts and emergency funding has totaled around 7,000 billion. And that number is surely going to rise. But 12,000 billion gives us a sort of baseline for the crisis around the world. But even that number is huge. But even that number we've discovered recently has been is dwarfed by the amount that's hidden in offshore tax havens by the world's richest people. The Panama Papers leak revealed that number to be around about 26,500 billion. So these numbers are constantly being released in headlines and in news reports and end of year reports and so on, but they're basically meaningless unless they're contextualized in some sense. Of course, now we've gone beyond the billion-dollar-gram here. We're into trillions now. 26,500 billion is, of course, 26.5 trillion. So I could take that number and situate it in an even higher level, trillion-dollar-gram. Here's a trillion-dollar-gram. A lot of big numbers here, hard to scan. But let me just make one highlight for you. You've got 26.5 trillion hidden in offshore tax havens, contrasted with the 16.5 trillion it would take for the world to meet the Paris climate change agreements for us to stay below 2 degrees global heating. So yeah, these numbers are continually emerging, continually need to be sort of visualized and contextualized wherever possible. Trillions and billions obviously brings us into the realm of government spending. And I spent a lot of time in the UK here examining the UK's government spending. So I can, in fact, create a visualization around that, inevitably. This is the billion-poundogram. This is UK government spending, various different silos here. Just again, to get a sense here, the motivation was to get a sense of our budget deficit was around about 75 billion pounds. I mean, that's roughly about, I think, 85 billion euros. And I just wanted to understand what that number meant. And it's, as you can see, it's half of what we spend on our nationalised free healthcare service, the NHS, is 140 billion pounds. And that 140 billion pounds is more or less covered by the amount we earn in income tax, about 168 billion, and corporation tax there propping up a bit more revenue. And there's also a block in this diagram, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a little square here, it's around about 8 billion. I'd just be curious if you have any guesses what this might be. You can put your guesses in the chat. What might this 8 billion silo be in terms of spending? Any thoughts about what the UK government might be spending 8 billion pounds a year on? You can stick some stuff in the chat if you've got any guesses. The Isle of Man, someone is saying, yeah, maybe. The EU, Trident, yeah, Trident maybe. I think the Trident's about 2.5 billion a year. The Queen, yeah. Does she cost that much? Wow. Well, I think one of you was actually right. It is actually how much we spend on the EU membership fee every year. I mean, I just chose that as a random number, just arbitrary spending amount. But so you see, like, by taking a number and sticking it in a context, you can get a sense of the scale, get a sense of its significance, get a sense of its priority. Just bring these numbers down to earth, make them easy to relate to. But we're still in the realm of billions here. I mean, I can't relate to them in an everyday sense. So I wonder if I could convert these numbers further into something that's more digestible. So same numbers, but convert into a metric I think is easier to relate to. Now, how much the average taxpayer contributes per day to each of these silos. And my thinking here is, like, I don't exactly know how much I spend a year or a month, but I definitely know how much I can spend a day. That's a number I can relate to. So that NHS fee, the health service fee of 140 billion pounds converts to about £2.40 a day. Arts and museums is about 13 pence a day. That EU 8 billion figure converts to about 20 pence a day. We didn't see that on the side of a bus during the campaign, the Brexit campaign. What else we got? The deficit converts to about 84 pence a day, and Scotland is around about 99 pence a day, just €1 a day roughly for that great country, worth every penny, of course. So there's not a lot of visualization going on here. I've just used a different metric, and I've compressed the data. I've used some graphical images to draw the eye. So the final version of this image ended up looking more like this. So it's a sort of information flow or a data map. And you can explore this, find numbers that resonate for you or relevant for you, and make your own discoveries amongst the data thicket, if you like. So that's one thing I love doing with visualization, is just taking data and bringing it down to earth, making it easy to relate to. And when I create images like this previous image, I feel like a real journalist, like in the sense of being a member of the media, in the sense of mediating between the vast seas of data on one side and everyday life on the other. Okay, so turning data into a map so we can explore with our eyes. I want to show you another data set now. This image went a little viral, and if you've heard me speak before, you might know the answer to this next question. So if you know the answer, don't guess, and we'll test everyone else, see if they can guess. Okay, so when you try and guess what this data set is, there's something that peaks twice a year, once around about Easter, and then 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas, has little mini peaks every Monday, but then flattens out in the summer. Any thoughts at all? You can stick them in the chat if you've got any ideas. Remember, if you know the answer, hold back, because we can just test what everyone else is saying. Flu, someone is saying, well, yes, I mean, it's a kind of sickness, not miles away. Supermarket expenditure, I mean, yeah, a bit of retail therapy might help. Yep. Trips, yeah, I mean, you might want to go on holiday. That might be sort of in the complex. Pilgrimages, yeah, I mean, turning to the divine might be helpful. Yeah, chocolate, yeah, we definitely get some chocolate in. Yeah, Netflix might help as well. I mean, you're circling the guy here. Shopping, yeah, days off work, yeah, take some retail. Yeah, I mean, you're very close. It's actually most common breakup times, according to Facebook status updates. We gathered and scraped hundreds of thousands of Facebook status updates, legitimately and anonymously, I might say. And this is the pattern that was found in the data. A mysterious peak around April Fool's Day. What did you do? Mondays, you think people come out of bad weekends and the Mondays and update their statuses with the bad news, hence the peak every Monday. Summer, well, you want to be young, free and single for the summer, right? A little clear out there. And the lowest day of the year, of course, Christmas Day. Who would do that? Well, actually, somebody would, because if you look closely, the data is not exactly zero. So, you know this more than any audience. We're generating so much data now, every hour, every second, every millisecond. What we generate combined with Facebook, Twitter, and social media, it's creating this vast ocean of data, the data lake, big data. And it can feel kind of overwhelming. It can feel like we're drowning in this data. So one response to that, one approach is to have the right kind of question, the right kind of inquiry to ask of the data. This is sort of where the journalistic approach comes in handy. Journalists are question answers, aren't question posers, if you like. So ask the right kind of question, and if you're lucky, then the data might reveal a story or an insight or a pattern. That's like they're like flowers that bloom from the soil of data. So a lot of the work I'm showing you today, a lot of the work I do, it has a journalistic approach. So it begins with a question. And then I use that question as a thread through the data to see where it might lead me. So I might start with a question like this, for example. The horoscopes all just say the same thing. I mean, I don't know much about horoscopes, but that's the rumor. So again, I scraped about 80,000 horoscopes and did a word frequency analysis and visualized the most common words across the star signs in this meta horoscope chart. So you can see for yourself if horoscopes kind of say the same thing. But the red words here are strongly unique for each star sign, statistically speaking. Let's just zoom in. I'm sure there's some Taurians in the room. On average, it should be about 8% of you here should be Taurians. Let's look. What does the data say about Taurians? You're open, but you worry a lot. But you have nice eyes, apparently, according to the data. Can't see if that's true, but let's hope it is. Let's see. Any Virgos in the room? Should be, again, about 8% of you. You are totally perfect, Virgos. There you go. That's what the data says. Can't argue with that. So visualize the most common words across these star signs. Then I thought, hold on, I can go a step further. I can take the most common words of those and create a single prediction that apply to every single star sign every single day of the year, right? A meta prediction. So here it is, condensed from all the most popular words across all the star signs. Whatever the situation or secret moment, enjoy everything a lot. Family and friends matter. Keep making love. The world is life, fun, and energy. May be hard or easy, but just change your mind and a better mood comes along. There you go. Need never read a horoscope again, if you do at all. Now, I was just having fun here. This was like a fun little side project. I got into the idea, sort of playing around with this data and this idea. But, in the process of play, I learned how to do scraping. I learned how to do word frequency analysis. I visualized the chart, did the further analysis. So I picked up a load of data skills in the process of play that I can now use on more serious work or commercial projects and so on. So playing with this data, playing with this big data is a great way to learn how to handle it, to teach ourselves new skills, get confident with it, to get sort of creative with it. And if we're confident and creative with data, then that will radiate out to our teams, to our stakeholders, to our clients, and so on. So play is a great way to handle the rigidity, if you like, sometimes that comes with data, to get interesting or unusual results. Of course, there is one barrier. One of the barriers to playing with data is, and this is going to sound somewhat blasphemous in this company, but to be honest, a lot of data, to be honest, is kind of boring, right? There's not a lot going on. There's a bit of incremental shift from month to month, year to year. It's kind of dry, maybe. It's not very interesting. Or you already know the answer to the question you want to ask. You don't need to go on a big data exploration or create a massive visualization to be able to get the answer. But sometimes in the data world and through the data lens, this probably more than most audiences, sometimes the answer to a question when you pose it through the lens of data can be different, can be kind of not as simple as you first thought. Like, for example, I could ask you a very easy question with a simple answer. Who is the world's largest military budget? Feel free to put your guesses in the chat. Who do you think? USA. Yeah, exactly right. There it is, but close to $600 billion a year they spend on their military. And here are the other biggest military budgets of the world for contrast and comparison. And that huge US military budget figure is so big it can contain about 7 of those military budgets inside itself. And that's what the rest of the world spends on its military. And there's the US budget deficit as a contrast, just to see. Now, you might see that red number, that military budget, and you might literally see red. It might chime with the political view you have of the United States that it spends too much on its military, has a military-industrial complex, and so on. But is it true that America has the world's largest military budget? Because you have to take into account the fact that America has an enormously, fabulously wealthy economy. It could easily contain 2 of the other biggest industrialized nations inside itself. So its military budget is bound to be massively, disproportionately huge. So to be truer, to be fairer, we need to modify our question. We need to say, no, who spends the most on their military as a percentage of their GDP, as a percentage of their output? When you ask this question, you get a different picture. These other countries swing into view. We couldn't see them because we were focusing on that headline figure. And the USA drops to 19th in the world by this measure, by this metric. So we live in a connected world now. We can no longer take a single data point or a single number and claim truth or react. We have to sort of connect it up to other data to contextualize it, to get a richer, truer, more multifaceted view of a topic or a situation. You can do the same with armies. Who is the biggest army in the world, would you say? In the world, who has the biggest army? What are your guesses? China? Yeah, China. A lot of China's coming in. North Korea, perhaps. Yeah. Quite militarized population. Yeah, let's take a look. Who is the biggest army in the world? Yeah, China. Again, absolute figures, 2.3 million, and they're the other biggest armies. But of course, again, China has this massively, disproportionately huge population. So we need to normalize this data, sharpen the question. Who is the biggest army as a percentage of their population? Bang. Different picture again. North Korea, as someone guessed, is completely right. These other countries swing into view. And look at this, but though China plummets to 124th in the world. Actually has a tiny army for its size. So this soil, this data that I'm going to use the word soil because I always feel like it's a new kind of matter data, this new kind of material. We can grind it up, make a lens, and see the world in a more a sharper, more multifaceted way. And we can keep rotating a topic or rotating a data set and look at it through different angles. For example, go back to military. Who spends the most on the military as a dollars per person? by that measure, we get again a different picture. Saudi Arabia, Israel come the lead, USA back into third, and China is 55th in the world by this metric. Who spends the most on the military as a percentage of government spending? You spend a percentage on health and education and on military. Again, a different picture, maybe closer to a snapshot of some of the world's conflict zones. And by this measure, the USA is about 24th. So a simple question with a simple answer, right? Who has the world's largest military budget? Well, the answer when you pose that question through the lens of data and visualization is always the same. The answer is, it depends how you look at it. Depends what measure or metric you use to answer that question. There aren't many, as we get into rich topics and deeper situations, that multi-metric, multi-angle view, it becomes more and more important to get a sense of what's going on. And we're seeing this play out very strongly, of course, with the coronavirus pandemic. There is no one graphic or one metric that can really sum up or give a clear perspective on this topic. So as we've been creating visualizations around it, we've had to create multiple visualizations that all give an angle, which all fill in a gap in our understanding or our perspective. So we can get a richer, fuller picture, a clear insight. We've had to create about 16 or 17 different graphics just so that we can encompass the width of this global pandemic. So just some of the things I love doing, bringing data down to earth, turning it into landscapes, making it sort of multifaceted, and then bringing in a sense of beauty. And I don't mean just beauty in the sense of the graphical sense of beauty, color, form, and so on, but the beauty of clarity, the excitement and pleasure and the usefulness of taking something complex, as Darren mentioned, and distilling it down and making it clear and understandable for as wide an audience as possible without compromising any of the meaning of the data. I'll give you a little example of that in action. This is typically what you get from a blood test lab when you have a blood test. It's a clinical report, and you need a doctor or clinician to interpret it for you. So we put this through a visualization process, introduce color, visual hierarchy, highlighting. We rewrote the copy, gave it a sort of more of a layout, did some next actions and so on. And so without compromising the data, this document is now understandable by the clinician, the doctor, and the patient simultaneously. Because it's been converted or encoded, the data and information has been converted and encoded into this visual language, into color, shape, and pattern, which is more direct, more immediate, more powerful, more memorable, has all the power of visual communication. And I wonder if there's something cognitive about this power. We're pattern hunters. Our eye is exquisitely sensitive to variation in color, pattern, and shape. That's the language of the eye. Huge amount of neurons are just in our brain, just dedicated to the visual system. So it's an intensely primary, powerful medium of communication. So if you're able to encode the language of the mind, numbers, ideas, words, into the language of the eye, shape, and pattern, as you do in a visualization, do it well, then you're able to speak two languages simultaneously, each enhancing each kind of more powerful than the other. I'll give you a little example of that working together. Here's a little snapshot currently what's going on in the telecoms industry. It's a bit of a bun fight. Everyone's suing everyone else, mostly over tiny features of your smartphone. It's a massive patent war, basically. Let me explain what's going on in this image. The size of the company is yearly revenue. Red companies have decreasing revenue year on year. Black companies have increasing revenue year on year. The arrows indicate court cases. Resolved court cases are dotted arrows. Hard arrows are active court cases. And in the speech bubbles are why each company is suing the other, like I said, over tiny features of smartphone. Last year, for example, Samsung lost the slide to unlock case with Apple. Now has to pay Apple $400 million to use slide to unlock on their devices. There's a lot going on in this image. So let's take away the speech bubbles, the sort of story layer, if you like. And now we've got a pattern, but we've got some logos. Let's take away the logos. And now we're just on the language of the eye layer, just on that visual layer. On this level, your eye is exquisitely placed to answer two questions. Is there a relationship between decreasing revenue and legal activity? Is there a relationship between size of company and legal activity? Now, it's not necessarily a relationship or an answer you can see immediately in a spreadsheet. You kind of see it straight away here. Layer on concepts, layer on story, and then suddenly you've got an image that's got multiple levels to it. It's got a sort of depth to it. It's got 2.5D, if you like. And if you've designed it well, that is, if you've harmonized the visual elements so they don't collide with each other, you can take it in multiple ways. You can take it in as an overall pattern, kind of zoom in and get the story and so on. So, as you can probably tell from my language, I really see visualization, like one metaphor I like to use is it's like taking a photo of your data. It's like a new kind of camera visualization. It's like photographing your data. And as a data journalist, I actually feel more akin to a photojournalist than I do to a kind of written print journalist. I feel like I'm swimming in these exotic data landscapes, taking snaps of these incredible vistas that I'm being able to see. And I often think in camera metaphors, I think, what's in the background, what's in the foreground? Is this a wide, is this a zoom? What's in focus, what's out of focus? So it's an interesting way of thinking about how you might compose a visualization. Like, for example, I often might take a satellite photo of some data, see it from above. This is some quite boring data I received. I was exploring from the UN. This is biggest illegal drug using countries of the world, per capita, per person. Kind of quite boring set, but I thought, well, maybe I can enliven this. So this is the top 8 for each drug, an alternative world tour for you. These are the biggest cocaine using countries of the world. Just this little snapshot. And then we have the biggest cannabis using countries. Different pattern there. You're going to see a lot of Australia in this, by the way, just a heads up, a lot of Australia in this one. Then we have ecstasy, the biggest ecstasy using countries. Actually, I've seen quite a lot of the UK and Spain in this as well while I'm examining this. Then we have amphetamine or speed users. So there's a bit of a Eastern drift there. Then we have the opiate users. We hear a lot about the US opiate crisis, but also these countries have higher users per capita. Opiates, heroin, and so on. Then we have nicotine or the smokers, biggest smoking countries. And then finally, the drugs. There they are, the alcohol users, all congregated having a big party, hopefully socially distanced. So a few things here, sometimes you don't have to show all the data. It's very tempting when you create a data set and you worked very hard. I could have shown you all the data for all the countries, but it would have kind of overwhelmed you a little bit. So what's interesting is a layer, just like highlighting a layer and then staging it in a certain order. So there's a sort of structure and a sort of punchline, if you like, one way of telling a story with data. So mapping stuff from a globe from above is a good way of doing a satellite photo, but you can also do like an overview, conceptual overview. You can see how concepts might be linked from above. Like, for example, something that pigs, humans, and birds have in common. Anybody got any guesses? What do big pigs, birds, and humans have in common? Again, you can hit the chat and we can see. Any guesses? DNA, they do have DNA in common, that is true. Eyes, true enough. Eyes as well, yeah. They eat everything. That's probably true as well. Yeah, it is. Good guess there. Yeah, it is actually flu. H1N1, H5N9, avian flu, swine flu. Before the current crisis, these were the infections of alarm. And again, they popped up in the media from time to time. Should we be alarmed? How are they related? And so on. So, visualizing the size here is how lethal they are. And, it's interesting flu. Pigs are the sort of worrying species. They're the species that can get bird flus and human flus. They're often the vector between species. So I created this image to try and understand all these different types of flu. That was one reason I created it. The other reason is that it gave me the opportunity for an amazing pun. Are you ready? Are you sitting down? Yeah. I call this image influenza. Yeah. High five. I'm high-fiving you through I normally stage dive at this point when I'm doing this talk in person, but it's stupid. Zoom, online virtual talks, I can't do that anymore. Influenza, yeah. Conceptual overviews work. I keep showing you my emblem, for example. The emblem comes from a visualization I did for one of my books. Again, there's a question underpinning this visualization. Do any colors mean the same thing across cultures? Are there any universal color meanings? So I did a big study, gathered a load of notions, examined a cross-section of cultures, and we only found 3 colors that were consistent across cultures. Red is universally, anger is universally red, as is passion, and purity is universally white. But apart from that, or silver. So apart from that, no parallels at all. So these above views are really helpful for, being able to see things that cannot be understood at ground level. Topics that are too sort of complex or interwoven or multidimensional, that they need to be seen from above. One topic I would put into that, and I think a lot of us have struggled with, and maybe you've heard of this issue. I don't know if you come across this situation called Brexit. Any of you heard of Brexit at all? Well, and as we know, we've all public and politicians and stakeholders alike have struggled to understand Brexit and what the struggles and why it's been so difficult and so on. So I want to just give you a 3-minute visual exploration of Brexit and all the tangles and problems. I'm going to explain it to you in case you don't know. So to understand Brexit, you need to understand the European Union. Here's the European Union, and it's predicated on 4 main pillars: the free movement of people, money, goods, and services. These are the 27 nations of the EU. The UK is not in this right yet. The size here is the size of their economies. Okay, but the EU contains other elements. So within the EU, we have the Eurozone. These are the countries that take the single currency, the euro. Then we have the customs union. This allows the free trade of goods, tariff-free trade of goods. And that brings in Turkey, which is not in the EU, but is in a limited customs union with the European Union. Then on top of that, we have the European Economic Area, also known as a single market. This allows the free exchange of money and services. And that brings in Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. Then we have, of course, the Schengen zone, the area of free movement of people, passport-free travel. And that brings in Switzerland, which is not in the EU, but is in the European Free Trade Area, a bespoke network of trade agreements. So this is the EU. When we talk about the EU, this is the complex that we're discussing. So can you imagine that we can work out, or maybe you know where the UK is currently? It hasn't Brexited yet, but where is it currently? Can you pin a tail on this donkey? Where do you think the UK is? Just imagine where it might be. Okay, so I'll just reveal. Here it is. Here it is. It's in a pretty good position. It's in a single market, it's in the customs union, but it doesn't have to take passport-free travel, and it's not in the Eurozone. And it's the second biggest, or was the second biggest economy in the EU. It's now the third after France, thanks to Brexit. So, but we have chosen to exit the system, and I'll just take you through all the options that have emerged over the time, and you'll see why they've failed or succeeded. So we have the hard or no deal Brexit. That's the kind of one of the primary ones. We exit the system completely and fall back on World Trade Organization tariffs. The problem with that is that all 166 World Trade Organizations nations would have to agree to any tariff agreement before we left the EU, which would be by the end of the year, but by this current timeline, which of course is ridiculously impossible. For a while, there was a possibility of a soft Brexit. We would exit the customs union, but stay in a single market. Wouldn't prove so soft because obviously we'd be still subject to a lot of EU legislation, but we'd have lost our seat at the table. Then we had the possibility of a Swiss Brexit. So we would exit back into the EFTA. We were in the EFTA before we joined the EU in the 1970s, but Norway quickly signaled it had its opposition to this, having such an assertive economy as the UK and such a small club. Then there was a possibility of a semi-hard Brexit. I'm not sure if that was the official term. We'd exit the single market, stay in the customs union to support trade. But the problem with that was that if we stayed in the customs union, we wouldn't be able to forge any external trade agreements outside the EU. So politically, it proved to be unpopular. So eventually, Prime Minister Theresa May came up with a backstop Brexit, a sort of half in, half out situation, mainly to cover the very difficult issue of the Northern Ireland border. So Northern Ireland is in the UK, the Republic of Ireland is in the EU, and they share a 300-kilometre land border, which must not have a physical border because of the peace accords. So we exit the EU, how do you control the movement of goods, services, and people across that border? Well, incredibly difficult, and in fact proved a sticking point, which led to Theresa May's departure. And then we had Prime Minister Johnson come in and basically represent exactly the same deal, but put the border in the Irish Sea. So now we have a border in the Irish Sea, and Northern Ireland will stay in the customs union, and perhaps even in the single market as well, to facilitate that transition. And the idea is to quickly move, as soon as we've Brexited at the end of the year, to a free trade agreement with the EU, rapidly, within a year. Of course, just as a comparison, Canada's free trade agreement, I believe, took about 7 years to negotiate, and Japan's took about 5 years. And hopefully the new hard deal Brexiters are also hoping, if we go that way, that we will also get a free trade deal. So this is the sort of complex, essentially, and there was possibility of a second referendum for a while, and then we were going to delay Brexit, but all these options are now off the table, and in the current situation, we have these two options. As of today, literally today, and I think there are still agreements to be made on fishing rights and the role of the European Court of Justice as the main sticking points, but we'll see how that unfolds. Hopefully something will happen. So just an overview of using visualization and staging and storytelling just to build the complex in your mind of the EU. But if I'd shown you this slide first, it would have been too overwhelming. So, the act of data storytelling is not just to get your point across, but it's also to build and assemble your understanding in someone else's mind. And that was the purpose of that. Okay, so we have we've got a camera, we can see things from above, but we can also zoom, so we can crash zoom to a few numbers or a bunch of statistics that might reveal a lot about a world or a domain or a situation. I know climate change is forefront in the EU's agenda, and hopefully soon will be in the forefront of America's agenda, because obviously we need the attention. Just show you some numbers around that. Did a visualization around gigatons of carbon dioxide, try to understand emissions. How many gigatons of carbon dioxide have we released to date? Well, we've released about 1,035 gigatons. What does that mean? Well, we've released another 440 since 2000. So this is the total amount released by the Industrial Revolution. What are those numbers mean? Well, if we want to release more safely and stay below 2 degrees global heating, we can release about another 335. That's our carbon budget. How much is left to release? Well, there's about 710 in the energy reserves of fossil fuel companies. We have about another 780 that are in hard to reach reserves. And then there's about another 1,200 in state reserves and other sort of places. That's the situation. If we were to release them, this is the sort of outcome. A carbon budget will keep us below 2 degrees. We'll get up to 3 to 4 degrees by the end of the century, probably, if we release that. Then 5 to 6 degrees, and then we're well into the unknown. So, using small numbers to just, again, build an understanding and convey something. But there are rays of hope, literally rays of hope. I've been looking at solar power recently, researching. The potential solar power is amazing. It literally is incredible. This is how much potential is wrapped up in solar power, about 400 million daily megawatt hours. What does that mean? Well, the entirety of humanity's electricity use is 63 million megawatt hours. And we're currently using about 0.5% of that potential with the current solar power infrastructure. So an amazing potential there to turn our whole energy system around. So little numbers sometimes can just, you don't have to do a massive visualization, just sometimes a few numbers visualized can say or communicate the message you want to get across, or focus the mind of the person you're sharing with. So we've got a camera, we can go satellite, we can zoom, or we can go wide. Sometimes you want to show a lot of numbers, or you have a data set that is rich and beautiful and you want to display its structure. Perfect, you can do that too. This next image I didn't create, but it is by Nick Berry of datagenetics.com, a really great data science blog if you'd like to follow such things. This data sadly comes from data breaches, but if you give people the chance to choose a 4-digit PIN number, this is what they come up with. So we've got the first 2 digits along the vertical axis and the second 2 digits along the horizontal axis. That's a heat map, obviously. That diagonal line is people using double digits, 25, 25, 63, 63, and so on. The horizontal line at the bottom of the chart is people using their birth year, so 1965, 1973, and so on. And the heat in the bottom left is people using their birth date in a month-day format, so it never goes over 31. So it's an emblem of our predictability, you could say. And actually 3 numbers arise out of this data set are the most common. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 2580. Why 2580? Yeah, just straight down the keypad. An emblem of our predictability. But the wide shot reveals it. And I particularly like using these wide shots for communicating science. Like I love science, but I hate the media reporting of science. Always conflicting, always difficult to track, always sort of simplified. A few years ago, for example, I was on a super health kick. I decided I was going to optimize my diet, take hundreds of supplements, live to 150 years old, but I wanted that choice to be evidence-driven. So I started looking at the evidence. And of course, like I said, through the media, it's conflicting or it's just hard to track. So I decided, okay, I'm going to take all the evidence for all nutritional supplements and visualize it. So I visualized it in a chart I call a balloon race. So the higher up the diagram, the more evidence there is for a supplement in this chart. And the size of the bubbles here is like a popularity, like a simple Google index. We looked at thousands of studies, 7,500 studies, and only used clinical grade evidence. So large human placebo-controlled trials, Cochrane reviews, meta-studies, and so on. So it felt like it gave me authority to draw a line in the diagram and say, okay, supplements above this line are worth taking, but only for the conditions listed in the bubbles. There are no universal panaceas here. And supplements below this line are perhaps not worth taking because the evidence is inconclusive to non-existent. And about 78% of all supplements sit below this line in this $58 billion global industry. As you can see, I'm not having a little trouble presenting this to you. It doesn't quite fit on a slide. It actually only occupies 2 pages of my book. It took me like 3 months to research this, and it just filled 2 pages of my book. But that points to another power of visualization. I'm sure you know, the power of compression. The power to take a huge amount of information and distill it and compress it into a really small space. It's like the MP3 of knowledge, visualization. And because I've processed all the studies and I've read all the data, you don't have to. So the cognitive overhead of taking in all this data is low to the point of enjoyable. I mean, you can literally drink this data in. It's like looking at a landscape or a photograph. It's enjoyable. So the data richness isn't an impediment to your taking it in. It becomes yummy, you know? And I've spent a lot of time curating the data. Every single data image you've seen and every single image in my book and online has a companion data set in a Google Doc. And it means I can treat the data as a platform and build interactive front ends and tools on top of the data. Now, I would say there are probably a couple of types of interactives that are worth exploring. That I would call them light and hard. Light interactives are kind of have rollovers and emphasis and sort of layering, but you can't change the camera angle. You're sort of, you've got a fixed camera if you like. Whereas hard interactives that have sorting and filtering and maybe multiple camera angles, multiple visualizations, so you can get that sort of faceted view of a topic. And hard interactives are good for exploratory data viz, when you want to hand over a data set or a topic and have your user find stories or make discoveries or just, come across insights. Whereas light interactives are good for exhibitory data viz. You want to transmit a certain message or a certain angle to a given audience. So it's kind of like a fixed camera, a fixed view. So I just want to share with you a few interactives I've created. Obviously over virtual streaming, the frame rate's not going to be great, but these are quite nice and glossy in real life. So here's a visualization of that snake oil diagram. It spawns itself from the data, so when any new evidence comes out, you can quickly add a row in the data and it ripples online. So the data's alive. And because it's interactive, of course, it can be user-centric. So show me something about diabetes. Is there anything effective for cancer? You roll over a bubble, you get more info, you click on a bubble, it takes you to the study or the review article. I use a similar approach for data breaches, as you know, a most terrible scourge of modern organizations. These are some of the biggest ones of the last 10 years. And in this one, you can filter by sector and start discovering stories. Like I can filter healthcare, for example. And you can see a story starts to emerge, like 2009, 2010, really bad time for healthcare and healthcare security. And now it's been tightened up, and now it's healthcare insurers that are getting hit by hackers. So again, exploratory, find your own stories, see patterns, explore the topic. So interactivity, it's useful to deploy. You don't want to just do it for the sake of it. If it can add meaning or it's particularly useful for unpicking those thorny, difficult, tangled things that cannot be explained in a simple graphic. I put the Middle East in that topic area, for example. This is every key relationship in the Middle East. And this opening state is meant as a bit of a joke to show how it defies a simple solution. But pink lines here are love, and black lines are hate, and dotted lines are like complicated. So you can roll over each player and see why they love or hate the other, and it's a kind of like, it's a sort of interactive oasis. We keep it updated. It's like a bonsai tree. We just kind of keep trimming it and keeping it fresh. So the Dataviz camera can be aimed at anything. I think that's part of the reason why it's so exciting. I'm a film lover, for example, and I love based on a true story movies, but I hate being conned. So this is a scene-by-scene, beat-by-beat analysis of some of the biggest based on a true story movies. Red are false scenes and green are true, and in between colors are true-ish or false-ish, depending on your pedantry setting. There's a pedantry setting at the top of the screen there. You can set it to flexible, or I can bear a little bit of dramatic license, or maybe just the absolute truth. So we can use this to find out what has been the most false true story of recent years. Let's take a look. Oh, The Imitation Game. You see that movie? Lovely movie, right? Yeah, but basically made up from start to finish. Almost a travesty of the historic record. And for each film, you can drill down, see what each scene and beat said, see what the reality was, see what the truth, and so on. Yeah, it was a long weekend, that one. Whew. Yeah, sorry. Always kind of overwhelmed when I watch that and think about all the work that went into that. But it's great because, that's worth doing because, you create something that's sort of alive, that's visibly alive online, that people can feel the effort you put into things. People appreciate you trimming that data, filtering it, turning it into a message, making it digestible, making it enjoyable. There's appreciation for that because we're all swimming in this sea of misinformation and info overload and data. So it's an act of service. It's an act of giving to take something complex and distill it, make it clear, make it understandable, clarify. It's helpful. Now, a lot of visualizations I've been sharing with you today have been, using quantifiable data, obviously numbers, crunchies, measurables, great metrics. But some of you may work with, and I do a lot too, is more qualitative data. So more sort of sentiment, human, customer relational data, survey results, and so on. They also can lend themselves to visualization. So, for example, I could do a visualization of a left and right political spectrum. So this is a concept map. So this shows how ideas percolate down from government into society and culture, into families and individuals and background and a belief. And again, through contrast and comparison, like the billions, we can tease out the differences between these two sides, subtle and not so subtle. And it's helpful, because if we have gaps in our knowledge about the other side, we'll fill them with our prejudice, with our projection, with our misunderstandings. And that's how you end up with a caricature of somebody else's political viewpoint. So on the left, for example, it's about fair trade, centrally. On the right, it's about free trade. On the left, the goal at the heart of the left is economic freedom. The goal at the heart of the right is, the goal at the heart of the left is personal freedom. The goal at the heart of the right is economic freedom. So there's a subtle difference between the two sides. And it's helpful to see these differences because sometimes both sides use the same words, but they mean different things. So for instance, on the left, equality means a level playing field for everyone. But on the right, equality means opportunity for everyone. It's a subtle difference. And then freedom on the left is freedom from power and abuse. But freedom on the right is the freedom to achieve or fail, to bootstrap yourself. So both sides, they stand for equality and they fight for freedom, but they're standing and fighting for slightly different concepts. And that's maybe sometimes where the conflict comes in between them. Now, I have to admit, I'm a journalist, I'm a writer, I've worked for The Guardian and so on, and I felt a little conflicted making this image. I really wanted that left-hand side to sound better than that right-hand side. But I couldn't. I could feel it creep into my process, but I couldn't let it take over because I would have created something that was visibly biased, visibly lopsided. So as part of my process of creating this image, I really had to step into that right-hand side and really honor the perspectives there and realize somewhat uncomfortably how much of myself was actually in that side. But it wasn't too uncomfortable because ultimately I was just looking at an image. There's something unthreatening about an image. Like, if somebody's telling me about my political views or telling me about their political views, I might feel like I have to defend or shut down. But if I'm just seeing someone else's views or seeing a diagram of someone's views, it's sort of like I can let that in. It's like less threatening in some way. And it's a clue in the language. When you say to someone, oh, I see what you mean. Oh, I see where you're coming from. You're somehow telling them that you've mentally visualized their perspective and you can relate to it. You don't have to agree with it, but you can relate to it. You can kind of see it and relate to it. So maybe there's a role for visualization, especially in the political arena, where we have these polarized, divided realms and topics where we can start to see where someone is coming from and see what they think. And that might help us to relate. and maybe even heal some of these divides. So many new ways and interesting ways of visualizing data. I've got a project to just sort of ended phase one, which you might be interested in, which kind of embodies a lot of what I've been sharing with you today. It's called Beautiful News Daily. It's a chart a day, visualizing some of the amazing things that are happening in the world behind the sort of headlines, the things that we don't often hear about because they're not newsworthy or because other things are going on. So there's a lot of different charts and stories there to reveal. And, I'm drawn very much from the principle of visualization being a sort of language. I really see the visualization as language, and the charts and graphics that you use for visualization are like the words of this language. And you speak this language already. You see and speak these words every day, probably. So one thing that's happening in visualization is the vocabulary is expanding somewhat. And on top of that is the sort of modern demand for color and style and design and visual beauty that amplifies your message. You can become a signal and a noise to get attention on social media on someone. There's got to be something visually interesting or conceptually interesting about what you're saying. So I thought I might just wrap up with a little bit around the process, like what works. What are the elements that make a successful or impactful visualization? And I'd say there were four key ingredients that are necessary. Two of them are obvious and two of them maybe less so. So you're going to need to have good data and information. Obviously, there's a key ingredient. And you need to have good visualization and design. And what glue those things together, and hopefully you've seen a little bit from today, is you need a good concept or a question. You need an underpinning what you're trying to say, or what question you're trying to answer, what gap you're trying to fill in your audience's mind. One way to think about it is like, I feel like I don't visualize data, I visualize answers. It's a journalist in me. And then you combine that with a goal, like, what are you doing this for? Why is it? What's this for? What's your aim? And that helps you streamline the design and the concept and make something that's kind of minimal and beautiful. So all these things give something to the final visualization. The data and information makes it trustworthy, reliable, gives it authority. The concept makes it interesting, charged, topical. Your audience wants to look at it. The goal makes it useful, streamlined, and minimal. And then the visualization side makes it impactful, memorable, beautiful, all those sort of visual things. In the middle, you get that successful visualization. And in terms of process, like I was saying, often I just start, this is my process typically. I start with the seed of an idea that what might generate it, and I shape that into a concept. Then I move into research and design, gathering data and sketching and plotting, and then I finally move into design. Making something sort of more digital and beautiful. And just to highlight, concept is different from an idea. Like a concept is sort of a bit more fleshed out. It has a dimensionality to it. And the test of a concept is whether you can communicate it and not get too many questions back. You say an idea to someone, they're like, oh, do you mean this and this and what's that? Whereas a concept has a roundedness to it that makes it communicable. When you speak a concept to somebody, they kind of get it. That's the test. So this is my main process. And many of you, I'm sure, there's a lot of data people here today, have a process that perhaps looks more like this, where you start with data, you do an analysis, you pull a concept or a story or an angle out of that, you start sketching or plotting, and then you finally move to something that's designed. Yeah, and I use this process as well, like maybe 10 to 15% of the time. And then if you're a graphic person, I know there's some graphic people here today, you probably have a process that looks a bit like this. Somebody comes in the room and says, here's some data, make this beautiful, right? And you can see from that immediately that there are a few stages and elements missing that might sort of stop that process from happening smoothly. So yeah, this is a concept to try, actually starting with what you want to say first. It's an interesting way of looking at it, and I encourage you to think about it in this way, Like I said, I really feel like I don't visualize data. I visualize answers, or I visualize my understanding of the data. And I think of charts and graphics not as charts and graphics. I think of them as forms to convey messages, stories, and concepts. And when you get all these things together and when you align them, there's a kind of popping sound or feeling in the mind. You start to feel like you've seen something you haven't seen before, or you suddenly kind of like aha moment. So I'm just going to wrap up with a little moment like that. So a few years ago, I was reading a book by Clay Shirky, a New York academic, called The Cognitive Surplus. And it was about how there are so many people in the world sitting at bored at office jobs waiting to be involved in online projects, maybe more so now than ever in history. And here's a standout statistic: 200 billion hours spent watching TV by US adults, contrasted with the 100 million person hours it took to create something as awesome as Wikipedia, just as an emblem of our potential. Now, just what was interesting about creating this image is that I often sketch my images before I create them. Here's my sketch. As you can see, I was way out with my mental scaling of 100 million, which is a lot of money. Of course it is, but relatively speaking, might not be. And I thought, what if that cognitive deficit is exploited? Like, hard to scale these big numbers. So I found this. I looked around and found this. Before he left office, President Obama announced the federal budget of the United States, the amount of money needed to run the government apparatus of America, $3,500 billion. But he said, it's a time of austerity, so I'm going to cut 100 million from this budget. And everyone was like, yeah, great, good. Yeah, cut 100 million, excellent. Let's just do that visually, shall we? Take 3,500 billion US federal budget. So imagine your mind cutting 100 million. Scale that amount up. Okay, got it? Let's see. So cut 100 million, see how close you are. So look, 100 million. There it is. Be close? Well, maybe you were, but to be able to be supported to see that, to be able to perceive that, that to me is beautiful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for listening. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, David. At this point, I think everybody would like to actually stand up and clap. If I look through the comments that are now coming in, and that were coming in during your presentation, brilliant, genius, awesome. This is just brilliant. I think people really, really appreciated your talk. There are also quite a few questions that have come in. I don't think we'll have time for all of them, but I'd just like to throw a few in, if that's okay with you, David. Start with the first one. Which programming libraries do you use most often for your visualization? Do you have preferences or suggestions?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you listening. It was a lot of fun to share these ideas with you. Yeah, I do. D3 obviously is a big feature of our toolkit. We use a few tools that there's a tool called rawgraphs.io. I'll just put the URL in the chat that sits on top of D3. So if you're not a developer or a coder, you can actually access some D3 type stuff through a simple browser interface. That's a pretty cool tool. Yeah, so they're my main tools. I have my own tool called VizSuite, which also I use. You saw that doing the animated bubble charts and so on. So I've got a few tools. There isn't one tool that's kind of to one ring, to unite them all, basically. So I use a smattering of different tools wherever possible.
Thanks, David. There have been quite a few on data quality. I'll try and group them all together. Basically, how do you determine which data sources are credible? And how do you address the issues of using different data sources which are not harmonized?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have the luxury of working on the journalistic level, so often I have a lot of pre-cooked or pre-filtered or pre-cleaned data sets from authoritative outlets, solid NGOs. I use a lot of World Bank data. I use Eurostat, which I hear is quite good. Some of the US open data movement is pretty good. So I try and use those reputable, I guess you call them primary / secondary sources. I also do a lot of scraping, as you heard, so I try and originate the data wherever possible. When I'm visualizing scientific data, I try to go back I contact the authors and see if I can get original data wherever possible. So that's my main, and I try and use reputable secondary sources when I'm doing journalistic type things. It depends on the topic, really, and how, obviously how significant the topic is. And in terms of cleanliness,
indeed,
yeah, spend a lot of time cleaning and checking data. Try and be open about methodology whenever there's anything we have to do, not necessarily to manipulate data, but just to massage it or move it around or combine it. And we just flag that up, and we are open about our methodology, and we're open to critique on that. So try and just tread carefully, be respectful, be open, transparent, and hopefully that catches a lot of potential mistakes.
Okay, thanks, David. Maybe just one more, because we still have a few things to get through. One question was: it seems to be very time-consuming exercise. And if you don't have dedicated and specialized resources, as is the case in quite a few public administrations, where to start?
Yeah, well, I would say the concept, by having a concept-driven approach, it does accelerate things, not only because you can formulate, you can formulate what you're going to say and what your goal might be, and even what your visual approach might be in sketch form before you even go into any kind of production cycle. But you can also sort of see problems that might emerge, and you can test it off stakeholders and people that might down the line be the kind of people that might interrupt or force you to rewind, so that you get more of a seamless flow, because it's a bit like writing a script for a film before you shoot it. You don't leap into shooting a film, you do the script, you storyboard and so on. So all that prep work actually stops interruptions further down the line, which are often the reason why things slow down. It's not that things are hard to build, it's that other stakeholders and people and critiques come in.